sometimes the biggest struggle for people is to know when the relationship has run its course. When does this relationship have to end? What's going to be the best scenario for you? And that's what we're going to talk about today. When is it time to leave?
Check it out.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the Positivity Experience. It's your girl, Lori, and we are in June. Good Lord, we are in June, and it got here so fast. So this past weekend, we just had, Memorial Day and unofficial kickoff to summer, and here we are. We're halfway through the year already, and now is around the time that people, well, not just now, honestly, every day, I think people reflect and they look at their current relationships and they say, are these relationships serving me? Or if you're in a place of attachment and insecurity, then you're like, oh my God, I need a relationship, right? And we're going to talk a little bit about all of those things. And if you are interested in a worksheet that is going to help you identify some things as well as your deeper fears and where to start to address that, that's over on my Patreon. And you can jump over there at patreon.com/The Positivity Experience, or there is a link in the show notes anywhere that you're getting this podcast right now. And it's just really important because relationships are such a funny thing. Like, really think about that. You're like, hey, random person, I think you are good. I think it's time for us to be together. Maybe we're going to procreate and live together. Like, realistically, relationships are such an interesting thing. And there's such a fine line. And it's been said for years, a thin line between love and hate. And maybe dramatic. You might not hate someone, and I would love for you not to. And to also understand, and sometimes I think this is hard for people, is to understand that sometimes people's growth might have to happen without you. So just because you want a relationship doesn't mean that the other person does, or the relationship may have run its course for them, because it really isn't just about us. There's more than you in a relationship. We're going to talk about different types of relationships, because I think when people hear relationship, they immediately think of like a partner or, a love interest. But relationships are pretty much everything that we face every day, right? Friendships, family relationships, even coworkers, right? Maybe you see the same person at the gym. It's not really a relationship, but you start to get comfortable with these people. But what happens when you're not comfortable with these people any longer? And what if you are dealing with abandonment issues and fear of rejection and attachment and anxious attachment? And, oh my God, I need this to give myself validation. So those are all deeper issues. And I have so many different topics on those specific things. And I have so many more things that are going to kind of address all of those. And we'll address a little bit here. Oh, if you hear wind, I am sitting outside because it is 72 and it is beautiful outside. And I wait all year to do this with you guys. And so you'll probably hear a wind over the next couple of weeks. So this is a confrontation of yourself and of saying, okay, what is it that I really want? But what is it that I need? Not just what is it that I want. So that's why I did this one right after the conflict. So if you fear conflict or confrontation, then you know what? This might be a good time to also go back and listen to last week's podcast. And if you're on the Patreon, both of those worksheets are going to complement each other pretty well. So here's a question to you. And this is something that you're going to have to ask yourself straight off rip. And you might not know the answer to this. What is it that is your non-negotiable in relationships, right? What's your non-negotiable? Now, your non-negotiable list should be much, much shorter than your negotiable list, right? So an example of that would be like, well, I'd like to have somebody taller than me. Okay, well, if somebody's really kind and they check some other boxes, maybe the height isn't that big of a deal. Maybe it's negotiable. Maybe it is non-negotiable, but you have to get clear in it. And it doesn't have to be something over the top big. For me, I have 3 cats and I love animals. If I could have 700,000, I would have 700,000. I'm married now, but let's say I started dating and I wasn't with my husband anymore. And I find out that this person either doesn't like animals or they don't believe about them being in the house. That's a deal breaker for me. I'm not going to sacrifice my animals. I'm not going to compromise on this. That is not up for debate. Now, I also want to make sure that I know what the other person's non-negotiable is, because that becomes a problem too. You're like, oh my God, I didn't know that this is what this person wanted all the time. Well, that's why dialogue is going to be, I'm talking about relationships that haven't started yet. Dialogue is going to be so important in the beginning, even in friendships. What do you want out of a friendship? All right. So let's transition from, like, say, a partner into a friend. Do you require, right? Now, this is the tricky part. If you are in anxious attachment, if you are insecure, if you need external validation, you got to be careful of saying, I need a friend who's going to call me every day, or that we go out every weekend. That may not be a requirement. It may be something that you're living in attachment. So there's a lot of gray areas about a lot of things that we're talking about. It isn't just for, like, it's not black or white. And I think that's the important factor too, because there's so many gray areas and so many things that can bleed into attachment and codependency, fear of rejection. All of those things become a driving force that you have to really evaluate, because a healthy relationship is one that's of autonomy. Autonomy meaning individuality, right? My husband's a golfer. He golfs more in the summer than he does anything else. I don't have to be with him all the time. I don't have to check in with him all the time. I want him to have a life outside of me and have something that he enjoys. And that is a healthy relationship, right? If you are the person who says, I need to be together 24/7, or, I want us to do something every single weekend, we want to evaluate this why. Why is it that you need it that frequently? So that's a separate topic that has been spoken about, and then I'll speak even more about. So when we're talking about getting out of relationships, it doesn't matter what they are, this is where the resistance comes into play. You get so very comfortable with how it's going. Even if it is not all that great, you're like, I know the chaos that I'm dealing with. You might want out, but then you're like, oh God, then I got to start over again. Yes, let's keep it real that starting over in a relationship isn't always fun, right? In any type of relationship. Now you got to get to know the person. Now you got to, oh God, you got to dredge things back up. You got to, okay. Don't let that stop you from getting out of a relationship. Well, I've been together for 30 years. Okay, so what? Stop thinking that because you've invested all this time that there's some weird requirement that you have to stay. Well, we have kids. Again, I'm telling you, I do this as a profession. I can't tell you the amount of times that I am working with teenagers or early 20s that are like, I have no idea why my parents stayed together. I wish that they would have divorced a long time ago. But everybody thinks I need to stay for kids. You have to be careful, because there is a repercussion that comes along with that. Okay? So how do you know that it may be time to get out of this relationship? Well, there's a couple different ways to evaluate it. One is if you're constantly feeling the need to be on eggshells. This could also be a parent. This could be a friend. This could be anybody. Do you feel that you can't have open dialogue? You can't say anything because they're going to turn it back on you. They're going to overreact. They're going to get erratic. They're going to get in an emotional space. Well, that's why you have to say, if I'm walking on eggshells, why am I doing that? Okay, this goes to that, abandonment. Well, I'd rather have them than not. No, you would not. No, you would not. Stop holding on to relationships for the sake of having people. Just because people are breathing oxygen in your space doesn't mean that they are even there. Very often, they're not there at all. So if you're walking on eggshells, that's a big indicator. And I don't mean, listen, not everybody's going to have a great day. Not everybody's going to be super kind every day. And it might be a few days where they're not. You might feel like, oh God, like I don't want to rock the boat. Okay, that is a normal part of relationships in general. But if it is primarily that way, where you're like, well, I can't really say how I feel, or every time I say it, and again, gray area, your insecurities are no one else's to correct. I'm going to repeat that. Your insecurities, your past relationships, your past betrayals are no one's responsibility today. No one's, except for your own. Process, was there an expectation? Was there an idealization that you had in that relationship? Do you feel like you sacrificed so much of yourself and then you feel some kind of way? And now you've immediately jumped in, or fairly immediately jumped into another relationship. And now you're like, well, I don't know that I could trust this person and I need to go through this person's phone. Hard pass. It is not John's responsibility to pick up the slack from the Steve relationship. Okay, I'm just making up names. It's not one person's responsibility to heal your insecurities, to coddle you, and to babysit you while you're getting through it. And that is a harsh but fact. Okay? And that's why you have to say, maybe I need to be alone for a while, because you may find serial daters. You might be a serial dater. You might be the person who says, well, I got to have somebody, or I got to always have people around me. Good. That's an indicator that we need to go in and address something deeper. Book a session with me immediately. My link is always in all of these show notes. You need a session, then get on board, because it isn't just the other person. It's you. You are responsible for deciding what is best for you, and they are responsible for deciding what is best for them. That is a fact. You are the only human that's going to live 365 days, 24/7 with yourself. That's it. You're not living that way with anybody else. So if you're walking on eggshells, that's a good indicator. Now, that goes right into the very next one. If you lack trust, if you are like, well, I don't know if I trust that person, and you're constantly suspicious, you're constantly going through that, again, is this your insecurity? Is this your need for control? Is this your attachment? Is this your codependency? If you lack trust, stop trying to make the other person prove themselves to you. If you need everybody's password and you need to know who they're following on Instagram and where are they all the time, and I don't mean GPS because you want to see safety. Like, I mean really tracking and, oh, they have an opposite sex girlfriend or male friend or, you know, whatever the case may be. If that's it, you got to check yourself. Stop trying to make the other person sacrifice their life because of your lack of trust. So now it could be something that the person did that was a lack of trust, and maybe you can't get past that. Maybe you can. But you got to ask yourself, if I'm lacking trust, why am I staying in it? Okay? Because it becomes a one-sided effort. So let's say the other person, we're going to put this on the other person. Let's say there was some betrayal. And the other person is like, okay, you know what? I've been in therapy. I'm turning the corner. This is what I want to do. And then you're constantly bringing up the past, bringing up the past, bringing up the past. It's time to go. It's time for you to go. It's time for you to go. Right? Because if you can't let it go and you're going to keep thinking about it, then don't stay in it for either one of you guys. So if it's one-sided though, if you feel like, well, I'm the one that wants to go to couples counseling, I say this to people all the time. I work with individuals, I work with couples, I work with groups, I public speak, all of the above. If in fact you say to me, hey, we've been working together and you're like, you know what? I want to bring my partner into this conversation. Okay, cool. I'm always going to ask you, is that person a willing participant? Not because you've basically convinced them that it's time to go to therapy. If you sort of quote unquote break someone because you're constantly on it and they just want to go to kind of, for the lack of better term, shut you up, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. You're going to have to let that go. So if it's a one-sided effort that you keep feeling like, well, maybe I want this more than the other person, I keep trying, stop waiting. Now you're resentful. Now you're upset. Now you're trying to figure out, well, why is that person not in it as much as I'm into it? Because they don't have to be. And so if it's a one-sided thing, one-sided effort. Now listen, when it comes to friendships, you got to know who you're dealing with. Not everybody is going to be responsive. I'm not going to text you back immediately, probably 90% of the time. My very best friend since kindergarten does not reach out to anyone and hasn't for a million years. I don't take it some kind of way. I'm usually the one, unless we're like on vacation or something, that is always the reacher outer. I don't look at that as one-sided. I know that she's introverted. I know she's not a reacher outer. I'm okay with that. So again, this goes back to your non-negotiables. So a one-sided effort though is where you're trying to force a relationship or you want the other person to show up and they just may not. Now, another number 4 is just boundaries. Okay, is they're constantly in that space of ignoring what your needs are. So this is where communication comes in. They can't read your mind, right? So if you have a non-negotiable because you go to yoga every Tuesday and Thursday at 5:00, and it's not like something that's like, oh, we got this trip or an emergency. It's just like, hey, you know what? I know you got this, but you know what? I want us to do this instead. Kind of poo-pooing on your stuff, or hey, you know what? I don't go here, or I'm not going to go with your friends here. I want you to go. And then they're trying to convince you, well, just come. I don't understand why you can't come with my friends. Meanwhile, you've already said it. So if you're in a space to where you feel as though there's always this pushback, but remember this too, and I have an entire podcast on this. Boundaries are not a boundary without a consequence, and you holding it without needing to constantly be repetitive. So let's pretend your partner says to you, hey, I'm going to go to Johnny's house tonight. And meanwhile, you and Johnny's wife you guys just don't get along. Whatever, you just don't like each other. He's aware of it. And you've said, okay, so now he says to you, hey, I'm going to go to Johnny's. Are you going to come with me? And you're like, no. But you go. Remember, just because you don't like somebody or your mother-in-law is a problem, do not try to pull rank to have that person not go spend time with their parent or with their friend. I don't care how insecure you are. Stop trying to prevent them to have a life outside of you. Again, that goes back to, other things that in which you're dealing with. So if in fact he says, well, I'm going to go to Johnny's, I still don't understand why you have such a problem with his wife. This is where you say, I am no longer going to have this conversation about Johnny's wife. If that continues, I will leave the house and go to Target. I will go in the other room, or I will hang up the phone. I'm no longer going to discuss this with you. So now next week he brings this up again. You have to follow through. You don't say, I told you not to bring it up again. And then you go, he's not listening. Well, you're not holding a consequence. So because if you're holding a consequence, no one can overstep your boundary. They can just attempt to. All right. So if you feel as though that's a thing though, and you're like, I can't deal with this because there's constant pushback, then you know what? Now might be a really good time for you to say, I need to reevaluate this relationship and the role that this person plays in my life, because you do have that power. Okay. This next one, like I said, unresolved conflict goes back to that lack of trust, right? This is number 5. If old conflict keeps getting brought up, not just you bringing it up, but let's say they keep bringing it up. Well, don't you remember last year when you did blah, blah, blah? You're like, oh my God, are we still there? Oh, I guess you're going to be, and then the passive aggressive comes into play. Oh, you're going to go out with her, are you? Okay. Well, don't forget, she has a reputation. Like, stay in your lane, bro. Because constantly people are going to be bringing up things. And if they're bringing it up and they can't let it go, it's a good time to look at this relationship. Now, vice versa. Maybe you're the one that can't let it go. Back to what I said. Then you know what? It's still time to go. So either if they're doing it or you're doing it, it doesn't matter. If we are not letting things go and you're struggling to the point that you can't and it's causing you more stress than it isn't, time to go. It's time to go. Okay. Number 6, feelings of manipulation, gaslighting, guilt tripping. Let's go back to that other example. All right, that's fine. I mean, you never go to Johnny's house with me because it's always about how you don't like his wife. Well, I guess I'll just go by myself. We never do anything together. Everything about that is manipulation. It's guilt tripping. It's control. Okay. Well, and then you go, yes, I'm not going because I'm not going to be uncomfortable. Oh, well, you're not really uncomfortable around her. You're just jealous of her. Gaslighting. If these are the constant conversations, and again, vice versa. If you feel the need to be passive aggressive and you're trying to guilt trip someone and you have an expectation that they owe you something, it's time to get out of that relationship and to be alone and start really working on it. And you know what? You may need to be alone if they're doing it, to regroup and say, what is it that I'm going to allow? Because what you allow will continue. Not might, it will continue. So you have to be really careful of trying to overlook that gaslighting and guilt tripping. Number 7 is something that I feel is kind of common, but people don't do it, is you're on different life paths. Okay, so I don't care if you met at 21 and you had the same goals. You're like, oh my God, we had the same goals. We're going to start a business. We're going to do all of that. 15 years later, you decide, oh my God, I don't want to do that anymore. And that's actually what happened with my first husband. I grew in a different way than he was. Not bad, not good. He was on one path. I was on a different path, even though we started on the same path. If you have a different life path, stop trying to drag someone on the life path with you. Well, if they would just see, we ain't doing that. If you start to go on different life paths, differences are great. You don't ever imagine dating yourself. For most of us, we'd be like, oh my gosh, we'd drive ourselves crazy. We're not going to do that. Okay, we're not going to do that. But you have to understand that the difference is great, but it's when you have long-term plans that are different. Stop trying to force that person on the path and don't let them force you on that path. And don't let your attachment, fear of abandonment, lack of control, insecurity, don't let that make you change your life path. Okay? Be like, oh, well, okay. And now you start negotiating with yourself. It was probably going to be hard anyway. Now you're trying to give yourself permission to follow their life path. And guess what's going to happen? Oh my God, you're going to build so much resentment. You are going to have so much resentment towards that person, and they will too. If they change their life path, there's going to be a lot of it. So why else do we hold on to that? I just told you, number one is idealization, expectations. Oh my gosh, you know what? Oh my God, I love being around this person. And all that person needs to do, now we start dictating. All that person needs to do, now the 1 and 2 are going to go together. Idealization and hope, aspiration, imagining. Oh my gosh, I know. First of all, you don't know. I know if they did this, our relationship would be good. You don't know that. No, you don't. You have no idea. You have no idea. So because you're idealizing and you have this expectation of like, well, if they would do this, if they would just come to therapy and then they would see my side, they don't have to. They don't have to. Now, you don't have to stay in the relationship. But if you fantasize about the potential, I could just see, I aspire to have this relationship. The more you do that, the more you're going to stay. And the more you stay, the more problems you're going to have behind staying. Okay, so that's really important. Now, number 3, you are not addressing yourself. You're worried about somebody else meeting these needs. They can't. You're not meeting the needs. If you're not meeting your needs, these other people certainly can't meet your needs because those needs are no longer real needs. They're insecurities that you're trying to fill by externals. Okay, so you need to say, are my emotions, though, being met? Because if you're clinging to a relationship that the person is checked out, guess what? You're probably not going to have a lot of emotional engagement from that person because they don't really want to be there. You never want to force a relationship where you feel like you have to force someone to love you. Now, this is really important, and this is big for manipulation. I've talked about it multiple times under the Manipulation Podcast. If a person ever says to you, if you leave me, I'm going to hurt myself. Run as fast as you can, leave them where they stand. And if they decide to do that, that is not your responsibility. That is one of the most manipulative things that somebody can say. Well, I'm just going to hurt myself. Okay, well then go do what you need to do because I'm out. I'm out. Because that is serious manipulation. So if you find that there's if this happens, then I don't know what's going to happen to me and you make me so happy. That screams attachment. That screams unhealthy relationships. And it most certainly screams manipulation. Okay? Fear of confrontation. Sometimes the reality that the relationship is just not for you means that you are the one that has to end it. You are the one that has to leave. This is where fear of conflict from last week is going to come into play. All right. Well, daggone it. Oh my God. Now I got to have this talk. I don't want to have this talk. Avoidance. All right. Well, I guess I'll stay. You know what? Now you start looking. Okay. Well, it's summer. Okay. Like we're going to do some things in summer. Like, you know what? I'll address that in the fall. Okay. Now you're lying to yourself. Now you're staying in another 3 months in a relationship that you're just so checked out of. Now September, October comes and you're like, oh God, I don't know. The holidays are coming. Oh, the holidays are coming. You know what? First of the year, new me, new year, new me. I'm going to get rid of this person. And okay. Now the new year comes and you go, oh, I don't know. Like, I really don't want to hurt their feelings. Okay. All of this is on you. Your avoidance and the next one is cognitive dissonance, right? Your experience of the relationship versus the belief of how you want the relationship. You believe the relationship is healthier than it really is. Okay, because over on the Patreon, I'm going to have you evaluate relationships and kind of that'll really bring some things to light. But you're looking at it through a rose-colored lens versus how it really is. So you'll stay because you're in that fantasy, you're in the idealization, you're in all of those things that we just discussed. Now, how do you accept leaving? First of all, you have to know that what you deserve, you deserve. If in fact you're walking on eggshells, you're feeling manipulated, you're feeling lack of trust, or that person has lack of trust in you, tries to control you, tries to prevent who you're hanging out with, what you're doing, where you're going, what you're wearing, every one of those is a massive red flag. Well, you got to have some honest self-reflection. Why am I staying in a relationship that is unhealthy for me? You're going to have self-reflection. Well, I don't know. I don't really want to be alone. Oh, okay. Well, that's a wound we need to address. I don't really want to hurt that person. Oh, that's even a bigger wound that we need to address. So you're not willing to hurt that person who, by the way, is not your responsibility when you're getting out of a relationship. Somebody on one side or both sides is going to feel a little awkward. And you got to do what's right for you. And they got to do what's right for them. So maybe it's them leaving you where you stand. Okay. Now, you got to look at it from an objective perspective. You pull back 10,000 feet and you literally take your emotions out of it. Just even if you have to put a paper with a line down the middle, pros and cons. And first you have to know what your non-negotiables are. How many of the cons are part of that non-negotiable? You're going to start evaluating and seeing pattern recognition on where you're really struggling. Acknowledge your own needs. What do you need? And why are you looking for somebody else to fill it? So that goes into the self-reflection, right? Because if you're self-reflecting, you're like, well, these are my needs. What are you not meeting? Okay, so self-reflection and then looking and saying, okay, well, what are my needs? And then follow that up. It's not on my list, but follow that up with why am I not meeting them? Why am I not dedicating time to prioritize myself? Why am I not putting boundaries in place that are going to protect my peace? Well, because maybe you don't believe that you deserve it. Maybe you're like, oh, but I have so many other things and so many other people. Stop with the martyr. Stop being a martyr. Being a martyr is not like some, oh my God, virtuous thing. It's not. And being a martyr is also massively manipulative. And so when you look at it and you say, okay, am I trying to be the martyr? Am I trying to avoid myself by trying to save the world because this is what I would have wanted? Okay, well, it's time that you may want to leave that relationship. Personal growth. Is this person and situation contributing to your personal growth? If it isn't, if it's no longer serving you, you've got to get out. You're not going to stay in a relationship that you're checked out of because you're growing, remember, different life paths. So you're growing in a space where, that other person may not contribute to that personal growth. Maybe they're not on their healing journey. It's not your job to put them on there. Maybe they're in the victim mentality. Maybe they're in the complaining. Maybe they're in the loop of not addressing it. Stop waiting for them to do it. You don't always have to be there. You don't have to be there. So you say, is this contributing to my personal growth? Okay, number 5, radical acceptance, baby. This relationship is just not it. I know it started off great. I know we've been together a long time. And in the beginning of our marriage, it was beautiful and yada, yada, yada. Well, it isn't anymore. It's not anymore. So you got to radically accept, you know what? Yeah, we have some bad days because we are what an average relationship is. Every day is not sunshine and roses. Yep. Sometimes you're going to have to carry 100%. Sometimes they're going to carry 100%. But again, if that happens more than not, then it's time to radically accept that this person and situation may not be for you or may no longer be for you. Okay? Plan for the change. Plan for the change. Don't over plan. That goes into control. But be like, you know what? I need to get out. Maybe you have a business. Maybe you have all of these things. Maybe you're deeply enmeshed with some things that, you're kind of dealing with and that, you're going through together. And maybe you have a house. Maybe you have businesses. Maybe you have some cars. Okay. Sometimes you just look at it and go, it's too overwhelming. There's stupid. But there's an old saying, it's cheaper to keep her. Like, okay, because you don't want to have to give somebody half your money. And, you don't want to have to dismantle the house and then try to figure out, are you buying me out? Who's going to live where? So you stay in a relationship just because. If you're not willing to be uncomfortable, if you're not willing to kind of walk into the fire a little bit, well, guess what's going to happen? You're going to stay in the fire yourself and you're going to keep burning. You're going to keep feeling lonely. You're going to keep feeling isolated. You're going to sit in comparison. You're going to look at your friends' relationships and glorify them of, oh my God, they're amazing and they get along so well. You are not behind closed doors. No one knows everything that goes on in somebody's house. No one. I don't care how bestie of a friend you are, how much of a mom or sibling that you are. Everyone's going through something that you don't know about because you don't need to know everything. So when you refuse to kind of accept that this relationship has run its course, it's no longer good for you. It's no longer good for the other person. And I want to go back to something that I said earlier about how, sometimes you stay and you're like, I don't want to hurt that person. Let me explain something to you. When you are staying in a relationship that does not serve you in any type, an adult child, a mom, a best friend, you are already hurting that person. You're already doing what you swear you don't want to do. Because and then you got to be careful. Because you're like, well, I'm checked out, but I don't know if I want to see that other person date somebody. Oh my God. Ego much? Let the person or friend or relationship, let that person find someone or something that is going to benefit them. They may be hurt in the beginning, but in the long run, they're going to benefit from it. They're going to see, they're going to find something that's better for them. So all the times that you keep trying to convince yourself that you're staying because you don't want to hurt somebody's feelings, but you're already checked out, you're already doing exactly what you just said you don't want to do. But then are you afraid of the confrontation? Are you afraid of actually communicating? Are you afraid of basically saying it's not you, it's me, and let me explain to you why? Well, then you know what? You're going to stay there. And what if you're on the receiving end of it? You're allowed your feelings, but never, and I mean never, try to cling to a relationship where someone is checked out. You're not going to make that person fall back in love with you. You're not just going to magically go to therapy for 3 or 4 weeks or 3 or 4 years for that matter, and that person's just going to fall back in love with you. That is time to look and say, my desire to have that is a wound that my mind and my body has not accepted. Radical acceptance. So as you go through this, like I said, I really want you to evaluate the relationships and not just the partner relationships. Evaluate your friendships. Evaluate, your parental relationships with your parents. But also evaluate the relationship with yourself. Are you looking to all of these people to fill some void? Because, okay, well, that's a whole different ballgame that we got to address. And so that's kind of your homework, because when you start to, and this is important too. Don't say, well, gosh, if I got rid of all my relationships, I'd be by myself. Good. Great. Oh my God, we're finally where we need to be. Yes, you need to be alone. If you are afraid of being alone, you will always be in relationships that are not going to be healthy. You will cling to relationships. You will never put yourself as a priority because you're too concerned about keeping a person for the sake of keeping a person. If you cannot be good by yourself to figure out who you are, to do self-reflections, you will not be in a healthy, happy relationship. Nope, not going to happen. There's no scenario where that happens when you're not showing up for yourself. If you're afraid of being by yourself, then that's what you do. Right? Like I said, if you're a serial dater, if you're like, I'm sure you know these people. They're out of one relationship. Oh my God, I love this person so much. Oh my God, we're going to be together forever. Then they break up. And then 2 weeks later, oh my God, I met this person. And this person is totally different from that person. Okay. Let's see how long this goes. I mean, you don't have to be negative. You don't have to say that. Be supportive. But if you start seeing that this is it, and if somebody, also a red flag, going into relationships, by the way, side note, if someone's coming in hot and heavy, red flag. Oh my God, I want to spend like 3 weeks in. You're talking about going on vacations together. You're talking about all these things. Oh my God, you're amazing. And you're the best I've ever had. And they're giving you all of this, love bombing you and all these beautiful things. They're not going to maintain that. They cannot maintain that. It's all fictitious. That comes from their own insecurities. That comes from their own attachments. So be willing to walk away from relationships. So ask yourself this question right now. Am I willing to possibly dismantle every relationship that I'm in and go into the unknown because I know that I'm worth it? I know that I need to find myself. Eat, pray, love kind of moment. Am I willing to do it? Because if you're not, then you're not willing to get out of relationships yet. And that's fine. But you got to go to the deeper rooted issue of the fear of abandonment, fear of rejection, yada, yada, yada. Gonna have to do that. Okay, so this is so important. And I think the more that you look at it and the more that you go inward within yourself, the more that you're going to realize maybe a lot of my relationships that I've held on to were maybe never good for me in the first place.
Check it out.